The snow hadn't fallen yet, but the wind already carried the bite of winter. Dust swirled across the dirt streets of the rough mining town known only as Stag Hollow, where saloons outnumbered churches, and a man's word was only as good as the whiskey behind it. Men drank to forget, women danced to survive, and no one dared look too long at a stranger. But when Thorne Callahan rode into town that gray afternoon, people looked. He was shirtless despite the cold, his broad, weather-worn chest scarred with old wounds and sun-darkened from years of solitude in the mountains. A thick sheepskin draped his horse's saddle, but he wore no coat, only leather trousers and boots so worn they looked melted into his skin. His hair was long, dark, uncombed. His eyes cold steel, almost wolfish, scanned the street with quiet calculation. The townsfolk gave him space. They always did. Thorne rarely came down from the hills, and when he didn't stay long. Today, though, he wasn't here for bullets or beans. He was here for a woman, across the road. Outside the Silverhook Saloon, a scene was unfolding. A girl young, maybe 22, was being shoved out the front doors by a burly, red-faced barkeep. Her clothes were thin, more suited to summer, and her cheeks were flushed with embarrassment and cold. I said, "We're done with you, Ellie." The barkeep shouted, "You can't work if you can't stand." Ellie Ray stumbled and nearly fell. Her knees were red from kneeling, her fingers bleeding from scrubbing floors. She clutched a small sack, probably all she owned. Her lip trembled. But she didn't cry. She was too proud for that. Or maybe too numb. No one helped. No one ever helped Dot until a pair of bootsteps rang louder than the wind. Thorne walked up to her without a word. The town quieted like a church after a funeral. Ellie looked up, startled. Her breath fogged in the cold, and for a moment she couldn't decide if the man was a ghost or something worse. His eyes studied her, not with lust, but something else, something unreadable. He looked at the barkeep. "She's done here?" he asked, voice low and deep as thunder. The barkeep snorted. "She's no good to us. Can't clean, can't pour. You want her? Hell, you can have her." Thorne reached into a small leather pouch at his hip and pulled out $2 silver. He placed them on the rail of the saloon door without another word. A laugh broke out among the bystanders. $2. Someone barked. Cheaper than a mule. But Thorne didn't care. He turned back to Ellie. "Come with me," he said. Quietly, Ellie's brows furrowed. What do you want from me?" "Not now," he said. "Just warmth. I've got space." "You can leave later if you want." That made no sense to her. She had heard men say all kinds of things to get their way, but this one said nothing. No promises, no threats. Just an offer. Her instinct screamed to run, but where? So she nodded. He helped her onto his horse. She didn't protest when he wrapped a thick hide blanket around her or when he mounted in front and urged the horse forward. She clung to his back and for the first time in days felt warmth, not just the heat of his skin, but the slow rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her cheek. As they rode out of town, Ellie turned to look over her shoulder. No one watched. No one cared. She was just a girl bought for $2 silver, but the man whose back she leaned against? He hadn't touched her, hadn't grinned, hadn't whispered threats or sweet lies, and that unsettled her more than anything. Wilderness, as the town disappeared behind them and the trees grew thicker and taller, Ellie whispered, "Who are you?" Thorne didn't turn. But he did answer, "Just a man who's been cold too long." The forest swallowed them whole. Ellie Ree had never been so far from town. Trees towered like ancient giants, their bare limbs clawing at the sky and the dirt. Trail beneath Thorne's horse turned from packed earth to something thinner, colder coated in frost and fallen needles. The wind shifted here, quieter somehow, like it respected the silence of these woods. Ellie sat behind him on the horse, her arms around his waist, her fingers curled into the fur-lined hide that wrapped his torso. She could feel the strength of him, the way every movement, every breath was controlled. He wasn't riding to impress her. He wasn't speaking to charm her. He was just riding that, more than anything, unnerved her. Every man she'd ever known wanted something fast. Her pa wanted silence. The saloon boss wanted service. The miners wanted her hands, her body, her tears if they could get them. But this man, this shirtless stranger with scars on his back and shoulders like claw marks from a lifelong thought, he offered nothing, demanded nothing. He just said, "Come with me." And now here she was freezing, riding through a forest that felt too quiet, her mind full of questions she didn't dare ask. She tried anyway. "You live out here?" she asked, her voice hesitant. "A ways farther up," he replied without turning. "Near the ridge." He didn't elaborate. Ellie chewed the inside of her cheek, her hands aching from gripping the saddle so long. "Why? Why me?" she asked, her voice cracking. "You could have picked someone else." He was silent so long she thought he might ignore her. Then, "You were already leaving, just didn't have a direction yet." That stopped her cold. She tightened her hold on the blanket around her shoulders and stared down at the thick mane of the horse. He didn't mean it as an insult, but it still stung because it was true. She'd been waiting for something to take her. Maybe a sickness, maybe a stranger, maybe a mistake. She hadn't expected it to look like this. An hour passed. Then another. Snow began to fall, light, slow, gentle flakes that kissed her lashes and melted against the curve of Thorne's shoulders. He didn't seem to mind. The cold didn't touch him. She shivered. He felt it. Without a word, he reached behind and tugged her arms tighter around him. She didn't resist. She rested her cheek between his shoulder blades and let her eyes drift. "Shut. I'm not afraid of you," she murmured. "I know," he said, but truthfully she wasn't sure that was true. She wasn't afraid of him hurting her like other men had, but she was afraid of what he made her feel, afraid of the quiet between his words, afraid that maybe, just maybe, he saw something in her even she didn't see. They reached the cabin. Just before dusk. It stood in a clearing ringed with pine trees and silence. Smoke curled from the chimney, and firelight flickered behind thick wooden shutters. The cabin was small, sturdy, hand-built. Everything about it felt solid. Worn but whole. Thorne dismounted and helped her down, hands firm but respectful. When she stumbled, he steadied her. "You hungry?" She nodded, too tired to lie. Inside, the cabin was warmer than she expected. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, and she could smell fresh bread, stew, pine wood. It didn't feel like a trap. It felt lived in, lonesome, but safe. Thorne handed her a blanket, then pointed to the table. "Sit, eat." She obeyed. Her stomach growled as she tasted the stew, thick, full of rabbit, potato, and some wild herbs she didn't recognize. It was good. Better than saloon scraps. He didn't eat. Instead, he lit a lantern, checked the windows, and then, without warning, walked back outside into the cold. She blinked. "Where are you going?" He grabbed a hide coat from a hook on the door and slung it over his shoulders. "I sleep in the shed." Her spoon paused midair. "Why? You're not ready to be touched." "And I'm not someone who takes what ain't given." The door shut behind him. Ellie sat in the glow of firelight, holding a bowl of stew she suddenly had no appetite for. Her thoughts spun faster than the wind outside. He didn't sleep in the bed. He didn't lay hands on her. He fed her, clothed her, and gave her his space, but not his heart. Not yet. Still, something told her she hadn't been rescued out of kindness. She'd been rescued out of something deeper. Something she hadn't felt in years. Loneliness. And maybe, just maybe, a man's aching need to be seen. The next morning came slowly, light dripping in through the shutters like honey over wood. Ellie Ray woke wrapped in warmth, soft furs piled on a straw mattress, her body sore from days of walking, riding, and sleeping on tavern floors. She blinked against the orange glow of firelight, momentarily confused. Where was the shouting? The slamming doors? The stink of beer and burnt meat? Instead, all she heard was wind, crackling logs, the creak of old wood. Then she remembered. The trade. The ride. The cabin. She sat up quickly and looked around. The room was rough but clean. A wood-framed bed in the corner. A small table with a lantern and tin cups. A line of shelves with dried herbs, firewood stacked neatly, even a wash basin filled. With clean water, she dipped her hands into the basin, gasping a little at the cold. Her reflection in the rippling surface startled her bruised cheek, chapped lips, hollow eyes. But also something steadier now, something unbroken. She rose and walked toward the hearth. The stew pot had been refilled hot again. A folded note lay beside it in thick, blocky handwriting. "Eat. I'll bring in more wood before dusk." She stared at the single letter. He hadn't touched her. He hadn't even spoken to her last night beyond that simple explanation. "You're not ready." Ellie didn't know whether to be grateful or furious. She spent most of the day pacing. She cleaned out the ash bucket, washed her face properly, sat in the single chair and stared at the fire. She found her fingers trailing along the carved bed frame, the edges of the kitchen table, the mantel lined with small, whittled figures. One, in particular, caught her eye. It was a small wooden carving, simple, elegant, and unmistakably feminine. A woman in a long dress, head tilted as if listening to something far away. The detail was surprisingly gentle, tender. It hadn't been carved in haste. Whoever she was, someone had shaped her out of love. Ellie traced the edges of the figure, and something in her chest tightened. She had never been shaped out of love. Not once. Late that afternoon, she finally stepped outside. The air was crisp, clean, and quiet. Chickens clucked nearby in a hand-built coop, and a pair of goats were tied near a hay bale. The whole clearing smelled of pine, wood smoke, and something. Faintly sweet sap, maybe, or apple peel. Thorne was out by the shed, shirtless again despite the cold. His breath steamed in the air as he chopped wood, his axe falling in slow, steady strokes. He hadn't seen her yet. Ellie watched him from a distance. His back was a map of old pain, scars that told stories she didn't yet know. Some were narrow, slashes like knife wounds. Others were jagged, as if left by fire or claws. But he moved like a man who'd long accepted pain as part of life. No grunting, no anger. Just movement. He felt her eyes before he saw her. He turned slowly, lowering. "The axe. You need something?" he asked. "No," she said, stepping forward. "Just wanted to breathe." He nodded once. "You carved that woman," she said after a moment. He looked at her fully now, his gray-blue eyes catching the light. "Yeah. Who was she?" He looked down at his calloused hands. "Someone who never made it this far into winter." Ellie swallowed hard. "Your wife?" He didn't confirm. He didn't have to. "She died in childbirth," he said finally. "Year after I built this place. She never saw the stove burn proper, never saw the goats fatten up, just vanished into the cold." Ellie's chest ached, not because of pity, but because she knew that kind of vanishing. She'd done it herself, piece by piece. Every day she'd survived without being seen. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Thorne didn't answer. Instead, he turned back toward the shed and gathered an armful of logs. "I'll sleep in the house tonight," he said. "If that's all right," she blinked. Of course. I'll stay by the fire. Don't worry." He paused. "I just get tired of waking up with ice on my boots." She nodded, unsure why his simple request made her heart twist so hard. That night, after a silent supper and another long fire, Ellie sat on the bed and watched him stretch out on a fur rug near the hearth. He'd put on a linen shirt, but it was unbuttoned at the chest, and when the firelight flickered over him, she saw the edge of one of those long, twisted scars disappear under the fabric. He looked strong. He looked hurt. He looked like someone who hadn't let anyone close in years, and still didn't know if he should dot. As he rolled onto his side and tucked an arm under his head, he caught her watching. A flicker of something crossed his face. Not shame. Not desire. Just loneliness and a quiet kind of hope. The days grew shorter. The nights colder. But inside the cabin, a strange rhythm formed between Thorn and Ellie, neither quite strangers. Neither quite something else. They moved around each other like wounded animals, unsure if the other had claws. Ellie would wake before him and stoke the fire. He'd bring in water from the stream. She'd sweep the floor. He'd skin rabbits. She'd boil coffee. He'd fix the roof. But they spoke little and touched even less. It wasn't fear. It wasn't hatred. It was something softer. A waiting. Until one night the walls whispered. It had snowed hard all day. The wind howled outside the shutters, shaking them on their hinges. Inside, the fire burned low, casting long shadows on the log walls. Ellie had cooked stew again, same roots and meat, as always. But she'd added dried berries this time, a sweet tart twist she hoped would surprise him. When he took a spoonful and paused, she held her breath. He didn't smile, but he ate every bite. That, she decided, was enough for now. After supper, Thorn sat in his usual place near the fire, carving a piece of pine. Ellie noticed he always carved when the storm blew hard, like it helped him think. "What are you making?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Don't know yet? Is it another woman?" He paused, blade frozen over wood. "No," he said quietly. "She's done being carved." Ellie nodded. "You loved her?" "Yes. Do you still?" His knife moved again, slower now. "Love doesn't disappear. It just changes shape." His words were so soft she barely heard them. "I've never been loved," she said before she could stop herself. Thorn's head rose. Their eyes met. In the flickering firelight, "You're wrong," he said simply. Then he stood and walked to the door, opened it, and tossed snow over the meat hooks to keep the cold animals fresh. She didn't press him, but her heart beat faster. That night, after the fire died and silence settled over the woods, Ellie woke to a sound she couldn't place. At first, she thought it was the wind. But no, it was lower, closer, a voice. She sat up, heart thudding. Thorn lay on the rug near the hearth, curled into himself, his chest rising and falling in a restless rhythm. "No. Clara." "Don't go," he murmured. She crept closer, barefoot and quiet. His face, usually hard as stone, was twisted in pain. Sweat clung to his brow despite the cold. His jaw clenched. And then a single tear slipped from the corner of his eye. "Please. Stay. Don't leave me. Not again. Ellie knelt beside him, unsure what to do. She reached out slowly and brushed her fingers across his temple. His eyes snapped open. For a moment, he looked at her like she was a ghost. "Clara?" He whispered. "No," Ellie said gently. "It's me." He blinked, awareness returning. He turned away quickly, ashamed. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "I didn't mean for you to hear that." "I think you did," she said. "Some part of you did." He sat up, rubbing his face with a trembling hand. "I don't sleep much. Not real sleep, anyhow." Ellie hesitated, then asked the question that had been eating at her for days. "How did she die?" He didn't answer right away. Then he stared into the ashes and said, "She bled out. Alone. I was trapping in the hills. Took too long to come back by the time I got here." There was nothing left but blood and wind. Ellie's chest tightened. She was pregnant? He nodded once. You built this place for a family, she whispered. Yeah, and then you lived in it alone. He said nothing. A long silence passed between them, filled only by wind and grief. Then Ellie reached out and placed her hand. On his skin was rough, scarred, strong. You don't have to keep punishing yourself, she said softly. His jaw worked. I don't know how to stop. Let someone stay, she said. He looked at her, truly looked, eyes locked, breath shared. I don't know if I can. Try, she whispered. She didn't mean to lean in. But something pulled her, gentle and slow. Her forehead rested against his. His breath caught. He didn't kiss her. He didn't move away either. They just sat there, fire gone cold, hearts warming for the first time in years. The snow had turned to ice. Days shortened into gray flashes. Nights felt endless. Inside the cabin, a fire roared to life with a little more urgency. So did something between Ellie and Thorn, an invisible tether pulling tighter, though neither dared name it yet. But tension was growing. It showed in the way Thorn chopped wood longer than he needed to. In the way Ellie lingered at the table after supper, pretending to read the same page over and over. Their words were polite, but their eyes gave them away. Every glance held a question, and one night, everything broke. It began with a simple mistake. Ellie tried to move a hot kettle from the fire to the table. She used a rag too thin. The metal scorched her palm. She cried out, dropping it. The stew spilled, splashing her skirts on the floor. Her hand throbbed, skin blistering instantly. She staggered back, cursing under her breath. Then he was there. Thorn burst in from the cold. Shirtless, snow melting on his chest, axe still in hand. His eyes locked on her burned hand. His expression changed from confusion to fury. Let me see, he said. I'm fine, Ellie snapped, holding the hand behind her. He stepped closer. You're not. Her voice trembled. Don't touch me. But he didn't reach for her. Instead, he threw down the axe, grabbed a bucket of snow from the door, and dumped it into the basin. Then he set the basin on the table and looked at her, calm but unyielding. I won't touch you, he said. But you need to put your hand in that, now. Ellie stared at him. It was the first time he'd spoken with real command, not anger, not control, just quiet urgency. It rattled something loose inside her. She obeyed. The cold shocked her, burned skin, making her hiss, but the pain dulled quickly. He knelt across from her, still shirtless, still dripping melted snow down his neck and shoulders, and said nothing. Finally, she broke the silence. You think I'm weak? No, he said. I think you've had to be strong for too damn long. She looked away. I didn't need saving, she whispered. He paused. Didn't say you did. I needed saving too, Ellie. Still do. Her eyes flicked to his sharp, tired, and heartbreakingly honest. She swallowed hard. You still dream of her? Thorn nodded slowly. Every night. But lately, it's not her face I see. Ellie's heart stilled. He stood, ran a hand through his wet hair, and paced away from the fire. You confuse the hell out of me, he muttered. You walk so softly, but you shake the walls. You act like you're made of glass, but you're steel underneath. She rose too, heart thudding. Then why won't you touch me? He turned on her, eyes blazing. Because if I do, I won't stop. I'll fall too damn hard, and I'm not sure you want to catch me. Ellie's breath hitched. You think I'm afraid of you? He stepped closer, just inches away now, his voice hoarse. No, I think you're afraid of being wanted without being used. Silence fell between them like a knife. He turned again, fists clenched at his sides. I'm not a gentleman, Ellie. I've done things, lived rough. I drink too much, I hurt, I carry ghosts in my chest. Ellie crossed the floor, and I've slept in rooms where men nailed the door shut, where I had to smile to earn a slice of bread, where the bruises came with rules I had to memorize. She placed her burned hand gently on his back, right over one of the long white scars. I know ghosts too. He didn't flinch. Didn't move. You asked me to come with you, she whispered. But you keep living like you're still alone.
I
don't know how to stop. Then let me show you. He turned slowly, so slowly that her hand slipped from his back to his chest, resting just above his heart. I won't break, she said. He reached up, placed his rough hand over hers. Eyes full of storm and surrender. Neither will I, he murmured. And then, finally, his lips found hers. It wasn't a kiss of fire. It was warmth after frostbite. It was steady, patient, almost reverent, like he was learning her and she was learning what it meant to be touched and not taken. When they pulled apart, he pressed his forehead to hers and whispered, "You're not mine. But God, Ellie, I want to be yours." And for the first time in years, she let herself want something back. 3 days of snow trapped them in the cabin like time had frozen. The storm hit in the middle of the night. Winds howled like wolves circling the clearing, and snow piled so high against the cabin door, Thorne had to brace it with a beam. Outside, the world turned white. Inside, it turned quiet, but not empty. Ellie and Thorne had crossed a line neither one could retreat from. It hadn't been lust that passed between them that night. It had been something more frightening. A question neither had asked, but both had started to answer. Now, in the enforced stillness of the storm, that answer grew louder. They fell into a new rhythm. Thorne carved more. Ellie mended torn clothes and added wild mint to their water. She read aloud at night from an old book she found tucked behind the hearth, some kind of half-finished Western novel written in too fancy prose. It made them both laugh. Laughter wasn't common in the cabin, but during those days, it began to echo in corners that once only held silence, and then came the moment she reached for him. It was the third evening of the storm. Snow still pressed against the door, but the fire was warm and the air inside was heavy with pine and something sweeter, something like anticipation. Thorne had just finished fixing the back hinge of the shutters. His shirt was off again. He said he overheated too easily, but Ellie had stopped pretending not to look. The way his muscles moved, the slow turn of his back when he reached for something, he wasn't showing off. He just didn't know what. It was to be watched with care instead of hunger. Ellie rose from the table and walked to where he stood, kneeling to gather kindling. "Let me help." He glanced at her hand. "You're still healing." She held it up. "Doesn't hurt much now. Doesn't mean it's ready." "I'm not made of paper," she said, then added quieter, "Neither are you." He straightened. Their faces were close again, too close for casual talk. The firelight carved out the ridges of his chest, the hollow of his throat, the long line of a scar running just beneath his collarbone. It didn't repel her. It drew her in. Her fingers brushed the edge of it. He tensed. "I want to learn you," she said softly. "Not just where you hurt, but how you've survived it." His voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know how to be gentle anymore." She smiled, trembling. "Then let me show you how." And this time, she reached up and touched the scar fully. What followed wasn't hurried. It wasn't perfect. There was awkwardness, tension in the way he hesitated, the way she flinched slightly when he lifted a hand to her cheek. But they moved through it together. On the fur rug near the fire, they kissed again, deeper this time. He wrapped her in the warmth of his arms like she was something sacred. She pressed her hand to his chest like she was grounding herself on solid earth. "You feel like a storm," she murmured against his mouth. "You feel like a calm I never knew I needed." He breathed back. When they finally lay side by side, bodies tangled beneath a fur blanket, neither spoke for a long time, not out of shame, but out of something close to peace. The next morning, when Ellie awoke, Thorn was already up, quietly shaving near the hearth using a hunting knife and a tin mirror. He looked over his shoulder at her. "Sleep all right?" "Better than I ever have," she said. He nodded, then added, almost shyly, "I'm making coffee." She chuckled. "You're a man of many surprises." He glanced at her over his shoulder, eyes warm. "You're one of them." She stood and crossed to him, wrapping her arms around his bare waist from behind. "I was bought for $2 silver," she whispered. "But now I'm afraid of something I never thought I'd feel again." "What's that?" "Being loved. And losing it." He turned slowly in her arms, pulling her close. "I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted, "but I know I want you here, not for warmth, not for help. Just you." Ellie leaned into his chest, resting her cheek over the steady thump of his heart. "Then keep me." And he did, that day. They didn't speak of love, but everything they did set a dot in the way he tucked her hand into his when she winced, in the way she kissed the scar above his heart, in the way they stood in silence, watching the storm clear and the sunlight finally break through the trees like a promise kept. The snow finally gave way to blue sky and melted edges. Spring hadn't come yet, not by a long shot, but the worst of winter had passed. The trails reappeared under slush and mud. Birds returned. And the silence around the cabin broke not just with wind or thawing branches, but with the thought of the world beyond a little shelter. Ellie and Thorn had built something quiet and fierce during the storm, something tender in a place where nothing tender had dared grow before. But peace, like the weather, was always changing, and peace, like love, couldn't hide from the outside forever. It began with a simple need: supplies. They'd run out of salt and lamp oil. The flour was low. Thorn mentioned trapping more, but the meat was lean this time of year, and Ellie had sewn the last of the usable thread into his torn shirt. He resisted going into town. She could see it in the set of his jaw, the way he busied himself with fixing things that weren't broken. But eventually, he relented. "You sure?" he asked as they saddled up. Ellie fastened the buckles on the saddlebags. "We both need this. You, especially." He looked at her sharply. "Me? You need to be seen," she said. "Not by them, by you. You're not the man who left this town years ago." He said nothing for a long time. Then, "You make me want to believe that." Stag Hollow hadn't changed. The saloon still reeked of smoke and old sweat. The general store leaned slightly to one side. The sheriff's office was dark and empty. And the men, rough miners and cattle hands, still eyed women like possessions and strangers like problems. Ellie kept her chin up as they tied their horse outside the store. She wore one of Thorn's old coats and her hair braided back her skin still raw from wind and cold. But she stood tall. Not like a servant, like a woman with someone worth standing beside. Thorn walked slightly behind her, like a shadow, silent, watching. Inside, the shopkeeper blinked in surprise. "Well, I'll be," he muttered. Thorn Callahan, out of the snow and with company. Ellie offered a polite smile. "We'll need flour, salt, lamp oil. Any dried fruit if you got it." As the man rang up the items, Thorn handed over coins without a word. Everything seemed fine until they stepped back outside. A familiar voice rang out. "Well, look who's come crawling out of his mountain cave." It was Colby Jess, a man Ellie had scrubbed floors for in the Silver Hook. His teeth were yellow, his eyes always narrow with suspicion and whiskey. He grinned when he saw her. "Didn't think I'd see you again, sweetheart. Guess you really were a $2 prize." Thorn froze. Colby took a step closer, voice louder now. "What's it like, huh? Living in the woods with a woman you bought?" People had stopped to watch now. Miners, a few girls from the saloon, the shopkeeper. Ellie's spine stiffened. She said nothing, but Thorn. Oh, he moved before anyone could blink. He had Colby by the collar, slammed up against the hitching post. I paid silver to get her away from men like you, Thorne growled. Not for ownership, for a chance. Colby tried to laugh, but it turned to a choke. You gonna kill me in the street, Callahan? He coughed. No, Thorne said. But I want you to remember this. Next time you speak her name like that, you better not be where I can hear it. Then he dropped him. Colby fell, gasping. Humiliated, Thorne turned to Ellie. His face, scarred and red from fury, was unreadable. Let's go. But Ellie didn't move right away. She stepped forward and faced the small crowd. She's not just the woman he brought back from the cold, she said. She's the one who walked back into it for him. And then, as the townsfolk stared, she reached for Thorne's hand and took it in hers. Not hidden, not ashamed. The ride back was quiet at first. Then, halfway through the forest, Ellie said, You didn't have to do that. I did. You scared me. Thorne's grip on the reins tightened. Didn't mean to. I can't stand hearing them speak about you like that. Like you're nothing. I used to feel like nothing, she said. Until you saw me. He looked at her, voice raw. And now I'm scared. Why? Because I don't want to lose the only good thing I've found in years. Ellie leaned across the saddle, placed a kiss on his shoulder just over the oldest scar. You won't. That night, back at the cabin, Thorne didn't take the rug by the fire. He took her hand and led her to bed. They didn't speak of the town. They only spoke in touch, in silence, in the knowledge that the world could try to steal what they had, but it couldn't define it. Not anymore. The storm had passed. The town had stared. And still, she stayed. Ellie hadn't planned for any of this. She was supposed to vanish into smoke, into forest, into nothing. She'd been bartered away like worn-out boots. No one expected her to live through winter, let alone come back standing taller than before. And Thorne? He didn't expect to fall in love with her, but they did more than fall. They chose, and now came the quiet after. The testing ground for what love really meant, once the heat cooled, once the fire became embers, once the danger stepped back to let them look each other in the eye without crisis. Without pretense. Thorne began clearing the old field near the ridge. It had been his mother's garden once, overgrown now with weeds and buried under seasons of neglect. Ellie found him one morning hacking at brush with a dull machete, his shirt off, his chest streaked with sweat and sawdust. He didn't hear her approach. You're planting something? She asked, arms crossed, lips curved. He turned, startled. Trying. Thought maybe potatoes. She stepped closer, brow raised. You, the wild mountain man, trying to grow potatoes? He looked at her. You need something to look after. Ellie blinked. Then she walked straight to him and placed her palm flat on his chest. I already have. His heart thudded under her hand. That day they worked the land together. She pulled roots, he broke ground. He guided her hand on the hoe when the angle was wrong. She taught him how to save seed potatoes, something she'd learned from an old cook on a ranch. It was the first time she saw. Thorne tried to make a future, not just survive one. Later that evening, she cooked rabbit stew, and they ate on the porch, beneath a stretch of sky so wide it made her breath catch. He didn't say much, but when she brushed hair from his face, he closed his eyes and leaned into her hand. You're not a ghost anymore, she said quietly. He opened his eyes. You brought me back. But not everything was peaceful. One night, when the wind howled again, Ellie jolted awake from a nightmare. Her chest heaved, her shirt clung to her damp skin, and her fingers gripped the edge of the bed. Thorne sat up instantly. What is it? I dreamed I was back in that saloon, she whispered, that you weren't real. He wrapped his arms around her, bare skin against bare skin. I'm real. They'll come for me, she whispered. No one's coming. They always come. He cupped her face gently. Then let them. I'm not letting you go. She leaned into his chest and let herself cry. For the first time, not from fear, but from the grief of almost never having found this. A week later, she rode into town alone. Thorne had protested, of course. But she insisted. I need to walk in there by myself, she said. I need them to see I'm not yours by chains. I'm yours by choice. She wore a clean dress, hair braided back tight, a coat she mended with care. And when she stepped into the general store, the chatter fell quiet, but no one dared insult her now. Not after what they'd seen Thorne do. She bought thread, soap, salt, and ribbon, paid with her own coin, walked out. With her head high. And on her way back, she stopped by the saloon, not to work, not to plead, but to say goodbye. To every girl still trapped. To every man who'd watched her fall and never lifted a finger. I'm not her anymore, she told Colby, who gawked from his chair. And if you come near that cabin again, you'll learn the hard way what a man like Thorne does when he protects what he loves. Then she left. When she returned to the cabin, Thorne was waiting outside shirtless again, chopping wood like the earth depended on it. He saw her dismount and strode toward her. You all right? Ellie pulled a red ribbon from her pocket and tied it around his wrist. I'm more than all right, she said. I'm home, his voice thickened. I didn't think I'd ever have one of those again. She stepped into his arms. You do now. That night, as stars spread across the sky like scattered fire, they made love again, slow, steady, sacred. She wasn't the woman he'd bought anymore. She was the woman who wouldn't leave, because now she belonged, not to the land, not to him. To herself, and to the life they were building, hand in hand. The frost melted fully by the end of April. Thorne's cabin, once dark and solitary, now stood surrounded by fresh growth, little green shoots, the first brave blooms, and the potato garden Ellie had claimed as her own. Spring brought color back to the land. And something else, too. A sense of permanence. They no longer tiptoed around what they were to each other. There was no need to name it every morning or explain it at night. It simply was. A rhythm, a breath, a promise tucked into every look, every silence, every touch. But one evening, when the wind was still and the stars blinked lazily above, Ellie sat on the porch, sewing a patch on Thorne's sleeve, and said the one thing they hadn't yet spoken. Aloud, do you ever think about forever? He didn't answer at first. Just stood nearby, sharpening a blade, his shirt slung over the porch rail, chest dusted with wood chips, eyes narrowed in concentration. Then, sometimes. She looked up. I think about what it means to stay, she said. Not just through winter, not just until I'm strong again, but stay. Thorne set the blade down, walked over, and knelt, not in some grand gesture, not with flowers or a gold ring, but with quiet purpose. Like he was coming down to her level so he could really be seen. He rested a calloused hand on her knee. His voice low, steady. I used to think I wasn't meant for that this mountain would bury me before anyone ever knew me. Her breath caught. But you see me, he said. And because of you, I want more than just surviving. She dropped the needlework in her lap. Is that your way of asking me to stay forever? His lips twitched. Is that your way of saying yes? She leaned forward and kissed him, slow, sure, and full of the kind of fire that only grows when it's fed daily by trust. When they parted, she whispered, I've already said yes, every day since you took me in. The next morning, Thorne woke before dawn, not to chop wood, not to hunt, but to find something he hadn't touched in years. In an old cedar box tucked beneath the floorboards was a pendant. A simple one, just a river stone, polished smooth and bound in leather. It had been his mother's. He cleaned it, oiled the leather, and held it in his palm a long time before walking back into the cabin. Ellie was stirring tea over the fire. When she turned, he walked to her, took her hand, then fastened the pendant around her neck. She looked down at it, then up at him. "What is this?" "My mother's," he said. "She never had much. But she used to say a river stone could smooth over the sharpest edges if you held it long enough." Ellie brushed her fingers over it, voice trembling. "It's beautiful." She would have liked you, he said softly, and Ellie, whose hands had once been used for scrubbing, not receiving, touched the pendant like it was gold, not because of what it cost, but because of what it meant. Word traveled slow in the mountains, but not that slow. Within 2 weeks, word had reached Stag Hollow. Thorne Callahan had taken a wife. No preacher, no papers. Just a woman with red ribbon in her braid, a river stone on her chest, and a look in her eye that said she belonged to no one but herself and him. The town whispered. Some called it madness. Others called it redemption. Colby Jess stopped showing his face. The girls at the saloon whispered about the woman who survived winter in a cabin with a ghost, and some began to wonder what kind of strength it took to make a man like Thorne smile again. One afternoon, Ellie found Thorne fixing a rickety fence post near the creek. He was shirtless again, always shirtless when working, and the sun lit up every scar on his back, like a map of the years he'd endured alone. She came up behind him and wrapped her arms around his waist. He paused, let out a long breath, and leaned back into her. "I used to think the world had taken everything from me," he said. "And now?" She whispered. He turned to face her, eyes fierce and warm. "Now I know it was just waiting to give me you." They didn't need a church. They didn't need a crowd. Just the mountain, the river, and 2 hearts that had nothing left to prove. Not every man proposed with flowers or a ring. Some did it by giving you a place to plant potatoes, a home that had never held laughter, a pendant warmed by time and memory. And eyes that said, "You saved me. Now stay." The summer came in golden and slow. Ellie stood barefoot in the garden, dirt on her hands, potatoes in her skirt. Behind her, the cabin doors were open, breeze rustling the white curtains she'd sewn herself. The scent of stew drifted out, mingling with the wildflowers blooming along the fence. She was humming, not because she had to, or because someone asked her to smile, but because the music inside her wouldn't stop. This wasn't the girl who had been sold for $2. This wasn't the woman who flinched when boots echoed behind her. This was someone, new someone becoming. Thorne stood in the doorway, arms crossed, just watching her, still shirtless, still quiet, but there was light in his face now, a softness in the way he looked at her, as if every time he blinked, he feared she might vanish again. She caught him staring and smiled. "You're not going to help me dig these, are you?" He stepped forward, wrapped an arm around her from behind, and pressed a kiss to her temple. "I built the fence. That's enough farming for today." She laughed, leaned into him. "You're lazy. I'm in love." The townsfolk learned to leave them alone. The sheriff had stopped riding up the mountain. The saloon girls sent gifts sometimes, a jar of preserves, a stitched cloth, a letter hidden in a tin of tea. One note read, "You gave us hope. Keep going." Ellie cried when she read that one. She read it out loud to Thorne, who didn't say anything, just pulled her close and didn't let go. Then came the letter, folded, yellowed and sealed with wax. A man from Kansas, a cousin of the man who'd once sold Ellie. He wanted to know if she was still alive and if he could offer her a better life, in a proper house, with proper servants. He was wealthy now, he said. Thorne found the letter by the fire. Ellie watched him read it, his jaw tightening, fingers curling. Then he handed it back. "You want to go?" he asked, even though the words nearly burned his throat. Ellie stared at him, long and hard. "I was bought," she said. "But I chose this. I chose you." Then she tore the letter in half, dropped it in the fire, and walked over to Thorn. Do? You understand? I'm not looking for a better life. She touched his chest. I have one. A week later, they hosted the only kind of wedding they'd ever want. No preacher. No witnesses. Just 2 cups of wildflower tea, a sky bursting with stars, and a pair of matching river stones tied around their necks like sacred vows. They wrote their own promises, carved on the inside of a leather band and tied around each. Others' wrists. Hers read, "You didn't save me. You showed me I was worth saving." His read, "You didn't fix me. You just stayed long enough that I healed." Years passed. The cabin grew. A second room was added. Then a little shed for animals. Then a small cradle built by Thorn's rough hands and polished for weeks. One spring, they had a daughter. Ellie named her Hope. She was wild-haired and loud and loved the potatoes more than toys. Hope grew up never knowing what a saloon was, never knowing what it meant to be owned. She grew up hearing stories of rivers and ribbons, of mountains and ghosts and love that grew slow, steady, and strong. And when she asked, "Mama, is it true you were once bought for $2? Ellie smiled and said, "Yes, baby. But your father gave me a life worth more than all the gold in the world." Sometimes, when the sun set soft over the trees, Ellie and Thorn sat on the porch, hands intertwined, silence between them comfortable and full. And sometimes, when she caught him looking at her like it was still the first night in that snowed-in cabin, she'd lean in and whisper, "Worth every cent?" And Thorn would smirk, kiss her slow, and say, "You were never mine because of what I paid. You were mine because of what we built." She was bought like nothing, but in the end, she became his everything. And more importantly, she became her own.